Hello and welcome to the Jank Bank. My name is Brad and I'll be your host as we explore fun, unusual, and unique commander decks that can still hold their own and win games. As a quick disclaimer, these decks are tuned to my own personal budget and meta, so feel free to make changes as necessary. Today's deck is for a dear friend and patron of the channel, Walton Shelby Crawlins. Shelby is just getting into Commander and Magic in general, and tasked me with building a zombie tribal deck for under $100. Luckily, I had a perfect commander in mind. The commander for this deck is Jozu Vess Lich Knight, a 4/5 zombie knight with menace for 2 and 2 black. Jozu also has a kicker cost of 5 and a black, and if that cost is paid, Jozu enters the battlefield along with 8 2/2 zombie knight tokens with menace. Jozu is one of my favorite cards from Dominaria, and despite his straightforward and simple design, is a very powerful card. Now, when I'm building a deck for a new player, I try to go pretty broad with the themes and focus on fun above all else. So, let's get started with some of the other token producers in the deck. Curse of Disturbance enchants a player, and whenever that player is attacked, we create a 2/2 zombie token, and any opponent who attacked that player makes one as well. Open the Graves makes a 2/2 zombie token whenever a non-token creature we control dies. Newscraft Mob enters the battlefield with 5+1/+1 counters on it. Whenever a player casts a spell, we remove one of those counters and create a 2/2 zombie token. Army of the Damned creates a whopping 13 zombie tokens, and has flashback so we can play it a second time from our graveyard. And Diagraph Colossus enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each zombie in our graveyard. And whenever we cast a zombie spell, we make a 2/2 zombie token. Tokens aren't all we have going for us though, so let's cast something a little bigger. Drakestown Forgotten enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of creatures in all graveyards. We can also pay 2 and a black and remove a counter to give a creature -1/-1 until end of turn. Liliana's Reaver has Death Touch, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card and we make a tap zombie token. Soulless One's power and toughness are equal to the number of zombies on the battlefield and in all graveyards. White of Precinct 6 gets +1/+1 for each creature in our opponent's graveyards. And Unbreathing Horde enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each other zombie we control and each zombie in our graveyard. And if it would be dealt damage, we prevent it and remove a +1/+1 counter from it instead. Now it's time to buff these creatures into some real threats. When Vizier of the Scorpion enters the battlefield, we amass 1. It also gives all of our zombie tokens Death Touch. Death Baron takes it a step further by giving our other zombies +1/+1 and Death Touch. And Lord of the Accursed gives our zombies +1/+1, and we can pay 1 and a black and tap it to give all zombies menace until end of turn. Liliana's Mastery gives our zombies +1/+1, and when it enters the battlefield, we get 2 zombie tokens. And Vanquisher's Banner gives our zombies +1/+1, and whenever we cast a zombie, we draw a card. Now this wouldn't be much of a zombie deck without some recursion. So next, we have Eternal Taskmaster, which enters the battlefield tapped, and when it attacks, we can pay 2 and a black to return a creature from our graveyard to our hand. Palace Siege gives us a choice between returning a creature from our graveyard to our hand, or dealing 2 damage to each opponent and we gain 2 life at the beginning of each of our upkeeps. Phyrexian Reclamation lets us pay 1 and a black and 2 life to return a creature from our graveyard to our hand. And when Gravedigger or Grave Shifter enter the battlefield, we can return a creature from our graveyard to our hand. Now it's time to add a little spice. Whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature we control dies, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. We can cycle Gem Palm Polluter to deal 1 damage to an opponent for each zombie in play. And when Plague Belcher enters the battlefield, we put 2 -1/-1 counters on a creature we control, and whenever a zombie we control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Loyal Subordinate says if we control our commander at the beginning of combat on our turn, each opponent loses 3 life. And Pontiff of Blight has Extort and gives all of our other creatures Extort. Ashnod's Altar lets us sack a creature to make 2 colorless mana. And Citadel of Bolas lets us look at the top card of our library at any time, and we can cast that card by paying life equal to its CMC. We can also tap Citadel and sack 10 non-land permanents to deal 10 damage to each opponent. Whenever Noxious Ghoul or another zombie enters the battlefield under our control, all non-zombie creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn. And when Grey Merchant of Asphodel enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is our devotion to black, and then we gain life equal to the life lost this way. Zombie Apocalypse returns all zombies from our graveyard to the battlefield and then destroys all humans. And we can pay 1, tap Grimoire of the Dead, and discard a card to put a study counter on it. We can then tap, remove 3 counters, and sacrifice it to return all creatures from all graveyards to the battlefield under our control, and they become black zombies in addition to their other colors and types. Now, before we move on to the ramp, let's go down to the battlefield of Jank and see how these cards work together. With Noxious Ghoul in play, Jozu comes into play as a board wipe, giving all non-zombie creatures -9/-9 until end of turn. We could also mix in Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Reclamation. Now we can sacrifice all of the tokens and Jozu for mana, return Jozu to our hand with Reclamation, and play him again. With something like Zulaport Cutthroat in play, this gets pretty painful for our opponents. Now, with our commander's high cost, we're going to need mana and lots of it. So next, let's take a look at how we're going to get it with the ramp. Soul Ring costs 1 and taps for 2. Mind Stone costs 2 and taps for 1, but we can also pay 1, tap and sacrifice it to draw a card. And 1 Power Stone enters the battlefield tapped and taps for 2. Thran Dynamo taps for 3. Everflowing Chalice has Multi-Kicker 2 and enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it for each time it was kicked. It taps for 1 mana for each of those counters. And Prismatic Lens taps for a colorless, or we can pay 1 and tap it to add 1 mana of any color. Charcoal Diamond enters the battlefield tapped and taps for a black. And Commander Sphere taps for a black, and we can sacrifice it to draw a card. We can pay 3 and sacrifice Burnish Heart to search our library for 2 basic lands and put them into our hand. And Cryptghast has Extort and makes our swamps tap for 2 black mana. Next, let's take a look at how we're going to get the cards we need into our hand with Draw Power. Sign in Blood, Night's Whisper, and Succumb to Temptation each let us draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. Read the Bones lets us scry 2, and then draw 2 and lose 2 life. And Siphon Mine makes each other player discard a card, and then we draw a card for each card discarded. Altar's Reap lets us sacrifice a creature to draw 2 cards, and Blood Divination lets us sacrifice a creature to draw 3 cards. Greed lets us pay a black and 2 life to draw a card. Argyl's Bloodfast lets us pay 1 and a black and 2 life to draw a card. And at the beginning of our upkeep, if we have 5 or less life, it flips into Temple of Alkalazatzatz, a legendary land that taps for a black, or we can tap it and sacrifice a creature to gain life equal to its toughness. And Underworld Connections enchants a land we control, and lets us tap it and pay a life to draw a card. Now our zombie army loves to eat enemy threats, but sometimes their undead eyes are too big for their stomachs, so let's help them out a bit with the removal. Tragic Slip gives a creature -1/-1 until end of turn, but if a creature died this turn, it gives it -13/-13 instead. Price of Fame destroys a creature and lets us surveil 2. It also costs 2 less if it targets a legendary creature. And Murder lives up to its name and simply destroys a creature. When Fleshbag Marauder enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. And Defile gives a creature -1/-1 for each swamp we control until end of turn. Moving on to board wipes, we have Mutilate, which gives all creatures -1/-1 for each swamp we control until end of turn. Extinguish All Hope, which destroys all non-enchantment creatures. And Necromantic Selection, which destroys all creatures, but then we get to return a creature destroyed this way to the battlefield under our control as a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. Plague Wind destroys all creatures we don't control, and they can't be regenerated. And in Garruk's Wake takes it a step further by destroying all creatures and planeswalkers we don't control. And now that we've made it through the spells in the deck, let's check out the lands that help us cast them. Cabal Stronghold taps for a colorless, or we can pay 3 and tap it to add a black for each basic swamp we control. Memorial to Folly enters tapped and taps for a black. We can also pay 2 and a black, tap and sacrifice it to return a creature from our graveyard to our hand. And Witch's Cottage enters the battlefield untapped unless we control 3 or more swamps, and if it enters the battlefield untapped, we can move a creature from our graveyard to the top of our library. Temple of the False God taps for 2 mana as long as we control 5 or more lands. Rogue's Passage taps for a colorless, or we can pay 4 and tap it to give a creature unblockable until end of turn. And Sanctum of Eternity also taps for a colorless, or we can pay 2 and tap it to return our commander from the battlefield to our hand, but we can only do this during our turn. Lastly, we have a whopping 32 basic swamps. So now that we've seen the deck in its entirety, let's take a quick look at the price tag. The total price for this deck from TCG Player comes out to $84.83 shipped and well under budget. Building under a budget was a challenge, but this deck was a ton of fun to put together, and I really hope you all enjoyed it. And that's going to do it for this week's deck, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, so please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest episodes. The Jank Bank is brought to you in its entirety by the incredible generosity of our patrons. If you'd like to join them in supporting the channel, click the link in the top right or in the description below. And with that, we bring the show to a close. See you next time, and stay janky.